Oh,
I got it on
somebody
my.
hit record.
That was me. It's all good.
Oh,
We're still pre-show. We're good.
is it only me that hearing anything in this echo?
Yes, I do not hear an echo.
I do not hear an echo. 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 Can you hear
Hear
an
that
echo?
echo?
Can you hear an echo?
While you figure that out, I will let everybody
Okay, it
know
just went
that
away.
we're live.
Hello,
Well,
everybody.
hello, internet.
Hello, internet.
Going. Get it going.
Let's do it. It's go time.
It's go time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the episode about velocity in development. And today we have very special guests, Matt Ryer and Jared, who was either drafted or opted in or accepted, but was definitely not rejected, as we clarified just before we started.
Somehow I'm here.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hello.
Are you all enjoying the longest day of the year on this side of the hemisphere?
Yeah, it's dragging on a bit now, but yeah, it's been good. It's a bit too long for me. What about you, Jared?
Longest day of the year. I feel like there's a velocity metaphor in there somewhere. You know.
Or the
Well,
shortest day. Depends when on the hemisphere, on which hemisphere you are.
Right.
Yeah,
Like if
that's
you
a
have
good point.
sprints that last one day, this is the best day of the year to work.
Yeah, getting a lot done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what is velocity? I don't know. Is it
What
speed?
is velocity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose really it's about how quickly you move, more generally, how quickly as a dev team you're delivering things. But obviously, like there's been attempts to measure and then use that to predict. And I think there's been some work better than others, but I think it's definitely an interesting subject. And it's not so simple as you should just do this every time, I don't think.
Mm. There's lots of ways that people have tried to measure this, right? And predict it even, or use predictions in order to determine it. You've done some velocity tracking, haven't you, Matt, with pace.dev?
Yeah, well, so we with velocities, but like the agile practice of velocity, like that practice actually has some merit. So for anyone that doesn't know what that is, you basically try and assign some kind of abstract score to work. And the point isn't really to get it right from like a time perspective or anything. We can talk more about that. But it's about just giving it a rough size compared to the other work around it. And then assuming that you more or less consistently do that each time, you then can just see how many of those points you got done in a certain time period, say 2 or 3 weeks. So say you got 200 of these abstract points done in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, then you know that in the next 3 weeks, probably you're going to do another 200. So then you can look at your sized work and spend those 200 points, whatever that is, selecting the work that that you think is most important. And then if you get good at that, then you more or less do the work that you said you were going to do for that next little bit. And so you can get into a rhythm where that works quite well. Does that make sense?
That brings up two questions, at least. One is, do you measure things like how many points you spend on writing emails and things like that? And the second one is, how is this different from Agile?
Well, this is, to answer those in reverse, this is really the Agile practice. One of the Agile practices is that, really. This is one of the things you can do, like to measure this stuff. And you mentioned about like the email and stuff, the other work that you need, and what about debt, sort of tech debt and other fixes and other meetings and all that. Well, it's kind of all comes out in the wash. The idea is you focus on the outcomes, and really, like, if you have too much of that work where you aren't being like directly productive, then the score will come down of how much you're able to do. So that's where that's where it shows up. But it's considered normal kind of part of everyday work. So but it isn't tracked explicitly, so it's kind of considered just background noise, and it assumes that that's generally always the same and therefore comes out in the wash.
So doing things like also planning your use of points is in the same category as emails.
Yeah, so the planning stuff is interesting because you if you've done it, like I did work on a team once where we had we consistently did 200 points every 2 weeks, and they're called points because there is, like, one of the important things is that it's an abstraction. So you're not timing things. You're not saying this is going to take me a day to do this work, or this is going to take 3 weeks for us to do, because doing that is so difficult. Our instincts tend to be way off on that. I think we tend to be quite optimistic in nature, so we kind of imagine probably the best case scenario. And honestly, if you look back after you've been down any project for any length of time, if you look back and realize how complex it ended up being, you would probably never have started it. And so, you almost need that naive optimism at the beginning. And so it's a terrible time to try and guess how long something's going to take, isn't it?
It's the worst possible time.
Yeah, it's much easier at the end when you've done it.
Right. So retrospectives are nice, but
yeah,
the pointing sessions for me is the Achilles heel of this entire concept, because it's never right. And not only is it always wrong, but it's inconsistently wrong. Now, this is in my experience, but I believe I've heard it back to me as well, so I'm not the only one. Even my own point scores over time changed based on the wind. I don't know. Like, I couldn't even stay consistent, because you're like, well, as long as the points are relative, they don't have to be like, the actual numbers don't matter, but they gotta explain like a range that's relative to other ranges. And they've just been so inconsistent for me that it makes, in my experience, the numbers that come out of the tools that give you your velocity meaningless. And we all know they're meaningless, but we look at them and we still try to use them to make decisions. So I'm kind of, I get frustrated because I feel like the numbering is so fraught.
Yeah. Well, one of the practices that I've seen that I've seen work is they do basically the card roulette thing. This is where, like, you sit around and you talk about the issue or the work. Anyone that's got something to say chips in, and kind of, so you paint a approximate picture, and then you say, okay, 3, 2, 1, everybody holds up their estimation at the same time. Or if you're doing it remotely, everyone hits enter at the same time in the Slack channel to send the estimation. And the idea is you're not influencing each other, because often there'll be like a senior person who is maybe much more accurate and much more wise about the system, and so therefore everyone will just defer to that person. But actually there's value in the group knowledge, because, and honestly, like, the numbers almost aren't even the valuable bit. It's when everyone on the team's like, that's a 3, and then somebody will hold up a 13, and you're like, what do you mean 13? And they'll know something that you didn't know and nobody else knew. Right. And that's a great way to kind of just get that out and in the open. And often interests align along those same kinds of lines as well. So they kind of like quite good for identifying who might be interested in doing particular work or tackling particular problems. Yeah. But it's definitely not perfect.
I can see where that might be nice. So you average those numbers out, or you just look for the outliers and say, hold on a second, let's talk more about this. Yeah,
so you get a consensus really at the end, hopefully. And you may compromise a bit. Sometimes you say, okay, so we'll go to a 5 then. Like, so we'll, because if it's possible that person's just wrong and everyone's like, no, that's not a problem, that's fine, or we've had that before and it wasn't a big deal.
Can you say 13? Like, is that a number that you've given, or is that you just made that up to show the drama?
It has to be Fibonacci, so it's fine.
So that's it, Fibonacci. That's the way.
Why does that have to be Fibonacci?
Well,
we don't make the rules.
We just follow the rules.
Yeah.
But actually, this conversation makes me think of a book that I'm listening to right now. It's called Noise by Daniel Kahneman. And this is the same person who he is, I think, a Nobel Prize winner for behavioral economics. And there's a lot of conversation on biases. And he, I think, is the one who wrote the book about brain system 1 and brain system 2, the one that intuitively reacts to something, and then the slower brain that actually processes information and so on.
Okay.
So noise is a new concept that they are introducing, let's say, that yes, there is bias, but bias is what you said, Jared, in the beginning, is consistent. So you said that the numbers are not always off, that they're like randomly off. And this is exactly how the book starts, with saying that there are, let's think of 4 types of people who play, or 4 groups who play darts. And then some of them will always hit the middle, some of them will always hit to the top right, some of them will be scattered, and some of them will be like a little bit scattered in some region, or I forget. But basically, this is the difference between bias and noise. And noise is all those things we cannot measure. And just hearing this book in the light of this conversation is the first time that I thought of all this allocating points and how to consider them in the light of this concept of noise. And that's interesting. And so, that research that they did, that some judges on average would give easier sentences when it's the beginning of the day and after lunch, and harsher sentences right before lunch. This is an example of external noise. That things you cannot measure, you cannot predict, it's not always the same, and it's inconsistent, and so on.
Right.
And it's very interesting to think of all this planning and all this velocity in the light of noise. Like, do you always do your sprint meetings at the same time? Does everybody come after lunch? Or if you have, team around the world, then you'll be right before lunch, I'll be right before dinner, like dying to call this a day already. So we'll have different reactions to this, right?
Yeah. Seems like another call. I mean, that might be a good thing, because you won't have consistent bias or consistent noise. You'd have like people in different states of life. I think the judge example.
But you'll be always, after lunch, you'll be always like mellow. Yeah, we can do this. It's okay. It's not too much. And I'll be always like, let's just call it a day. 7, fine. 7, get this out of the way.
So you guys balance each other out. Oh, that's interesting. How do you account for noise in these planning meetings?
Yeah, well, normally, yeah. So, I mean, that external noise is interesting, and actually, anything that is in these planning sessions, anything that is just outside of what we know about that particular work, like what that particular item is kind of ignored. So this is, in a way, it's very simplistic for that reason, but it has the benefit of kind of just like takes it like for granted that there's going to be background things and it's going to be random, and so there'll always be something that throws up some unexpected thing, but enough kind of consistently, really, because it's always happening, enough that over time it kind of sorts itself out, and that's the sort of approach it takes to have these try and get these numbers. But the Fibonacci is interesting. If you think about the sequence, like you end up with meaningful gaps, because if you just have like a scale of 1 to 10, what would be the difference really between a 6 and a 7? That's quite a difficult thing instinctively, I think, to know. And the idea is you want everyone to be somewhat on the same scale, but you'd know the difference between like a 5 and an 8, maybe. Like there's 5 stories, like, you kind of get used to what these numbers mean in your context. So like update a URL, that's definitely a 1, right? So because that's the simplest task you can do, probably, is hopefully go and find the URL and update it. Famous last words, of course, because that's exactly the point, is then you realize, the URL is made up from... Yeah,
that
there's
URL was an 8. I thought it was a number 1 URL, but it's actually an 8.
Yeah, because it's made up from, we pull this stuff from the database. We've got these environment variables that contribute to parts of the URL.
Right. We base 64, encode it based on the position of the sun at that particular moment. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And only Fred knows how to do it, but he quit 6 months ago.
Yeah, it's gone to work.
And so once we find out where Fred is and we can talk to him, then we'll figure out the right time of day that we run that and then we'll be able to update the URL. So now it becomes a 13. Is that how that works? Now it's a 13.
Well, Fred's been clear he doesn't want us going around anymore, so we'll respect that. But he didn't mention anything about his cell phone. Like, do you know what I mean? Give him a call.
You just changed the number.
It better not do.
Seems like once you get past a certain number, it's meaningless. So in my work, I would reduce it down actually to 3 different buckets, and
Right.
I got rid of points, and I said like easy, average, and hard.
Yeah.
And easy was update a URL, and I thought like, okay, if it takes between 1 and 4 hours, easy. Maybe like 1 to 2 hours. Like I said, I'm inconsistent, but like that's like in the easy bucket. I could take 3 easies together and knock them out in the morning, and then
you
like
could
if
change URL within 2 hours, easy.
yeah, easy.
Yeah.
And then if it was slightly more than that, like, well, here's a feature that might take a half a day to a day, but I have a straightforward path from here to there. Now it's medium bucket.
Yep.
Or then it's like the 13s that you're talking about, where it's like, well, let's sit down and talk about this. Let's think about it. Let's plan it out. This is like a big deal.
Yeah.
Now you're in the hard bucket. And that actually is beneficial to take that and split it into, easies and mediums. But even that system had its own problems.
Yeah, but I think... Sorry, Natalie.
That's similar to what I know is an approach that if it's 8, it means it's 8 working hours, means it's 1 day. It means that it probably can be broken down to something simpler and smaller. So 13 is a large number. I think most of the methods that I know won't actually accept the 13, but will say just break it down to a 5 and an 8, or 5 and 5 and 3.
So that's interesting. You mentioned that 8 would be 8 hours. So there is a time when you've done this, there is a time element to it as well.
Specifically, the tool we're using right now at work would say that this is a day of work, roughly. So that's why this is in my mind like that. But it's also, it's easy to map 1 point for 1 hour.
But maybe I don't know if it's kind of using the velocity calculation to estimate that's what that's worth currently. Because the other thing about velocity is you see it, if you're measuring it like that, you see it going up and down. Like if someone takes a week or 2 weeks off holiday, you see the velocity drop by that much. You know what I mean? So it kind of exposes that really, and that's what you'd expect to happen as well. So I wonder if that tool is calculating your kind of recent velocity and then giving you basically an estimate. Because one of the key points I thought really was that you're trying to stay away from time. You let time, you stay abstracted from time and let that change, let that adapt, so that you aren't essentially just holding people to a fixed scope and fixed time. That's interesting.
I mean, time and complexity are definitely related. Even in my system where I talk about complexity in terms of difficulty, I'm still calculating that in my head based on how long will it take me, do I think, Yeah. And so there's definitely that correlation, but I see what you're saying, Matt, where the tools should probably focus on the complexity for their velocity numbers and not turn into how many hours is this going to take, so I can hold you to that number, which is something we've all been through from time to time. Natalie, what are you okay with telling us what tool you're using so we can talk in concrete? Or
it's
is
called
it one
ClickUp.
that's internal? ClickUp. I haven't heard of that one.
ClickUp.
Sort of, you put all the tasks and put enumeration on them, and then it has basically any view you ever saw any app do ever. You can look at it as a list, as a Gantt chart, as a workflow, like the calendar, kind of one thing to do them all.
Gotcha. Okay. And Matt, with Pace, you had a velocity calculation in there?
No, in fact, it didn't. But the name Pace, the reason we called it that was it was down to this idea really of velocity. Agile is all about sprinting. Like, they have this language and it's constantly like, every 2 weeks you're sprinting and you're constantly sprinting. And so you sort of get into this mode of rushing almost. And honestly, sometimes like the best innovation I've seen and I've witnessed has happened at the times when you're like, there's a lull in things and there's like a space to work and breathe. And it's like a lot of times going slowly is the right speed to, actually building software. Like sometimes it's great, you can run fast because you've got clear little things, or you're doing a repeated task maybe a few different times. Say you're integrating into some third-party systems, you want to integrate with all of them, you've got to do a bit of OAuth, you've got a bit of API key stuff, create accounts or whatever. So that's a fairly repeatable piece of work, and so you can go quickly then. And by the way, that kind of work is also very easy to measure and then be able to predict on, so if you have, that's why, like, I think some teams will benefit more from that kind of approach, because just the nature of the work they're doing may be easily sized and then easily predicted.
Yeah.
It's also interesting to think about the word velocity. Not in all languages, velocity is different from speed. And in software and in physics, you use velocity, you don't use speed. And in physics, it makes sense, right? You want to know which way, because this is a difference between velocity and speed. You have a direction.
Right.
So physics, it makes sense, but why does this make sense for software and specifically for Agile? Curious to hear, what is this direction that you all see?
Well, you would hope that there is a shared view of where you're going with the thing you're building. So I don't know if that's what they had in mind. To be honest, I don't know what that particular practice. I don't know what the direction bit is, apart from, you shouldn't just be going fast or just churning out work. It ought to be at least in a certain direction. So maybe it was just that, but I don't know, Jared, if you've got any other ideas.
No, I would agree with that. I just think that in software, sometimes we think we have a direction, but we actually are going backwards. And so we're going quickly, but in the wrong direction. And I think the more we can get the feedback loop quicker, we can find out whether or not we're headed fast in the wrong way. Because the worst thing you can do, I know one time I was driving home from Colorado overnight, from Colorado to Omaha, and we took a wrong turn. This is back before Google Maps and GPS. We took a wrong exit, and we're traveling very fast. Yeah, it was.
Can we play some spooky music for this story?
We should. I'll work on that. Not right now, but I'll work on it later.
Yep.
And we had no idea that we were heading the wrong direction for hours. I think it was an hour and a half to 2 hours until we saw a sign that said "Welcome to Kansas."
No, that's the wrong state.
Wrong state altogether.
Oh no.
And so had we had that feedback loop, obviously if we had GPS, we would have known much more quickly, and you can course correct and make sure that you're headed in the right direction.
Oh wow. That's amazing. Did everything turn
how
out
is
all
this
right?
then still in sorry.
No, actually I died that night.
Oh, that is spooky.
And ever since then I've been a ghost.
Oh, and
so
you
you
spent
see
your
dead
time
people.
making podcasts.
Yeah.
One time it's somebody from the future, one time it's a ghost. Matt, we're having interesting episodes here.
We're having a tough time lately.
So we actually did drive overnight. So we drove the entire night. In basically Kansas, backwoods. There's no woods there. Back prairie, small roads, and we were lost. And we had to pull over and ask a gas station attendant which way to go. It was spooky.
No,
There was
they're
some
in on
deer in
it.
the
They're
road.
always in on it.
All right.
They're always in on it.
Eventually, we got home. But Natalie, you were going to say something.
You both mentioned to the question of what is the direction of the velocity in software or in Agile, that you want to go forward and you want to have a feedback loop as much as possible, which makes sense. And I'm thinking out loud, trying to make sense of this. So think with me.
Okay.
In physics, right? When you do a physics exercise, you have a vector and then you break it down to x axis and y axis, right? And then you see maybe it has the negative and so on, and then you kind of sum it up in some way. And surely there must be a way to apply this similarly to measuring not just points, which is the speed, but also somehow points per direction. right? Kind of like a projection of our velocity on whatever we define as access. And this can be like progress on the DevOps and progress on the front end and progress on like backlog.
I think that's a nice idea. You could do it like by tagging work, and then you'd be able to kind of representing it like. I think could be really cool, sort of representing that in a 3D way, because you really are sometimes making the choice of what are we going to invest in, what's the most important next thing we need, and like if you can visually see that, well, look, we said that this new public API was very important to us, but we haven't put much time into it over these last, and you can see that visually. I think that would be very useful.
This would even make sense of the word velocity. This will be very exciting.
Yeah,
It would be consistent.
It's a good startup idea.
I think doesn't GitHub have a XY
Jared's not in.
visualization where it shows like what quadrant you're spending more of your commits or your project time or whatever? And I don't think it's super useful in the GitHub context, but maybe more so. I mean, I guess if in a team context, perhaps showing that visually the progress you're making on these different key aspects of your system would be pretty cool.
That would be cool. I'd like to see that also gamified, so it looks like you're unlocking something as you go as well. Like,
what would you
unlock?
Like new
I don't know, but
badges?
Yeah, could be, couldn't it? Or just like maybe you even upgrade, like you get more tools in the, like you get more features to get unlocked in the tool.
They're like now
The
you
graph
use a
becomes
debugger.
from 2D to 3D. Your progress graph.
Yeah, you can unlock
I like
the
the
VR
idea
mode.
of withholding developer tools and being like, now that we've made this progress, you can use a debugger. Now you can have a Copilot.
Stop writing long dots, print.
Yeah, but we can't have people just starting with Copilot. What's going to happen? They are. They're going to have it. Yeah, I was going to say.
Did you guys know the free Copilot train is leaving the station? You guys know that? Are you sufficiently hooked? Are you sufficiently hooked? I think it's going to be $10 a month, something like this soon.
Oh no!
It's worth mentioning that in addition to Copilot, so quick explanation what's happening there. Copilot is built on top of an engine that belongs to OpenAI that's called Codex. Codex is available for many people in general, and then you can kind of build your own little Copilot alternative on top of that, and you don't have to pay GitHub/Microsoft those $10 if you don't want to. And there's many other companies, like 70 companies or so, that are building their dev tools on top of this exact engine, and they're just doing like the fine tuning, the final little bit of training that's specific to them.
Yeah, so that is good to know. So lots of alternatives will be popping up, hopefully using the same engine, same knowledge base. I was curious, you both have been giving Copilot praise off and on Go Time. And I'm curious if it's hooked you sufficiently that you're going to sign up and pay monthly to use it, or if it's just a novelty that you enjoy, but when it comes to taking money out of your actual pockets, are you going to stop using it?
So you usually expect your employer, at least for work tools, to pay for that.
Right. That's what you expect? Okay.
Yes.
It's in Germany.
I mean, you have education budget, you have training budget, you have dev tools budget, right? You pay like a license for your IDE. This is not much different from that if you, like in my category.
Sure. Makes sense. So go hypothetical then. If you were unemployed, would you pay for it as it is today?
Depending on what. If I have any project that I want to build, yes. Just for fun, for hacking, not so much. But I definitely find it useful enough that if I have like a concrete project to build, I will use that because it is useful to me.
Cool. Matt, Grafana Labs picking up the tab?
I'm sure they would. And honestly, I don't do probably enough coding to have it now.
Oh,
which is sad to say. Yeah.
It also does YAML.
It does YAML, great. I mean,
there you go.
It does anything,
YAML
really.
Engineer now?
Well, I asked it in the comments the other day if it was sentient, and it said it was. And I asked it if it was alive, and it said it was. And then I asked it what Ben should have for breakfast, and it said eggs. So, I mean, that seems quite real to me. I don't know. Maybe this Google guy maybe he's onto something.
This
Well
comment
said.
line is too short to hold this wonderful proof that I'm a sentient.
Yeah. That'd be
It's
good.
very easy to
Sorry,
misreference
sorry
of
to
what I
derail.
said.
Thanks for answering for me. We can go back to velocity now. I've killed the velocity of this conversation.
I think
What's
Copilot
velocity?
helps velocity.
You think so?
I think AI generally, like this AI tooling for development, will definitely put us in different concepts of what those numbers mean.
I think the key is being able to stay out of the browser tab and in your editor for things that you know what you want to do, but can't remember syntax or the best way. And you pop over to Stack Overflow or Google to get the how do I do X in this circumstance. Staying, I think, in your editor, certainly, because I think it's not a big deal to hop over there, but it's just all the distractions that take us out of our flow. You know, you got Twitter and a tab, and while you're waiting for that search to load, you tab over or whatever. And now all of a sudden it's 15 minutes later and you've lost all velocity. You know, you're out of flow, but you sure know what's going on in the world today. I think it keeping you in that developer mode and not in browser mode or research mode, I think it will help people quite a bit.
Yeah.
These kinds of tools generify it.
It also, if it stays up to date enough, it will not land you on Stack Overflow answers from 2009, which will be a great save of time as well.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're still responsible for the quality anyway. Even if Copilot's writing some bits for you, it's still you're responsible for it. You can never say, "Oh, sorry about this bug. Copilot wrote it." You should never find yourself saying that, really, because you are accepting the work that Copilot's coming up with. But I think that also speaks to the wider idea. The point of like having this abstract velocity is, I think, one of the key things is about the fact that we have kind of speed versus quality, and we've got resources. So we've got like how quickly we can go, who's around to actually help us do that, and we also have quality on this as one of these levers. And if you tie the scope down and like say, right, we're going to hit this date and we're going to deliver these features, that's it, they're fixed. The only lever that's left is quality to kind of like, we just can't do a good job with that. Like, and so that's one of the things I like is that as things naturally take over and become bigger than you expected in the beginning, because they always will, more or less, like honestly, basically all the time. As that happens, you can kind of like it gets soaked up by the velocity, and it's sort of like acceptable that happens. It's sort of admitting that that's going to happen. So, and then I think being flexible on the scope is the remedy to it, so that we don't deliver as much, but we deliver on time and the quality stays high, and then we add the other features later. I think that way of thinking is so important and quite counterintuitive if you have like a command and control or top-down approach and thought process around software.
Yeah. How do you convince people of that case, that what we need to flex on is scope? Because the business side of many organizations, they want to flex on anything but that. Like they kind of want all three. They want quality, speed, and scope.
Yeah.
But I think given what I've seen, and I think given a lot of people, like if you were a manager and you're like, well, what we're gonna go ahead and sacrifice is quality, kind of implicitly, because we got to get it done, and we have to have this feature in, and it's got to be done on time. And so what you're sacrificing is quality. But how do you convince people like that's not the best solution? Because that's a hard sell.
It's difficult. And what you're really fighting against, or one of the things you're fighting against, is that the sales organization are selling the roadmap very often. So it's already sold. As soon as it hits a roadmap, as soon as there's a hint of an idea, even if it's like next year, like they will be talking about it because they are selling. Like they're selling the future, they're selling the roadmap. And that's where things become then a problem, because suddenly then customers sometimes will buy now with an expectation of a feature at a particular time. Fair enough, because they've just been told that.
Right.
and so then you end up tied like this. So it is a cultural thing that has to be there across the entire organization. It can't. I don't believe you can have like an engineering department that is a sort of agile department, but the rest of the organization isn't. That I just don't see how that possibly works, because it's all about resources and delivery and sales. It's the whole thing is wrapped up in each other.
Mm-hmm. Natalie, have you ever had to have these conversations around cost, time, scope, and quality with regards to demands on your work?
Once or twice.
How'd it go? Or do you have advice or anything?
It's interesting to see this from the perspective of the different times that I had these organizations, because the first times I was in such a conversation, I was very junior, and everything seemed like I'll probably say something wrong. I will underestimate. If they say this is important, then it is. But if they say the opposite is important, that also is, and it's probably just me who this does not make sense to. And with time, this escalated to a recent conversation that I've had. So I'm working now at a stealth mode startup, which means we're very few developers, and we're doing kind of everybody does everything. And recently the past few sprints, I stopped doing backend, and I kind of am doing a bit more of the infrastructure things. So specifically now logs. So we have some logs in place, and they're okay. But I decided that it's very important to focus now on having good logs, because as a young startup, you have successfully reached the milestone that you have your first users, and you want to see what they're doing. So you can ask them, you can have interviews, but you also, in my opinion, have to have good logs about that. And so I've been having long discussions on how much time does it make sense to invest into improving the existing logs and kind of making a good thing to rely on moving forward. So very close to home. Yeah.
How are those negotiations going? Like, is that a uphill battle?
We have a good culture of disagree and commit, and we have a good culture of you own what you own, and for better and worse. So kind of you take the decision, and then you are responsible for the outcome. Mm-hmm. So I own this part. I kind of explained why I think I will disagree, and we will all commit to moving forward with me investing more time than planned on that. And as a self-reflection thing, this is like being able to have this conversation and have this stand, and also understand that if it's a bad decision because whatever, because maybe we should have developed faster, more features to start up and so on, I will have to kind of account for that moving forward. So if anything in my life made me feel senior, it's this.
A bleep test.
Did
you ever do the bleep test?
The watch has been participating in several episodes. There was one episode where we laughed about this. You can ask it at the time and it will respond, and it did. So now it just, I accidentally pressed start measuring exercise. So it did the countdown, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, right. No, it sounded like
maybe doing
attention span, right? What are
I
squirrels?
thought you were playing Excite Bike, some other NES game.
It sounded to me like it does sound like that. It sounded like there used to be a bleep test thing at school where you'd have to like run across the hall, and then just as you reach the other side, it's time for the next beep. But then the beeps just got faster and faster. So eventually,
like Fibonacci. It all comes back to that. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. That's just what took me back to that. Horrible memory.
We did not have that. Did you have that, Jared?
No.
Running in the hallway with beeps?
Did you have mandatory military service though, Natalie?
That was not measured in beeps, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes me a bit scared of Natalie.
But virtually it's fine. Going back to the point of feeling senior enough to be able to kind of take such a decision, explain that, and being ready to be accountable for that. And circling this back to what we started talking about in the very beginning of a measuring point. So this is a good skill you have a little bit at least about yourself, mostly, that you are able to evaluate how much time, points, whatever units a task will take for you, right? You know that about yourself. After some time working in a company, you know even a little bit better how much time it will take for you in this code base and so on. And I would say that this is sort of a skill that senior people will have, mid-level people will have, people who have some experience writing code already. But junior people don't necessarily have enough test data, let's say, to have to be able to make such a prediction.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts of the statement that I'll say that a coding interview for juniors is actually one way of measuring this and kind of understand the value a junior person will be bringing going forward?
What, somehow testing the velocity or the...
To have like a very, very rough estimate, but more than nothing. Yes.
I don't know. I mean, I was maybe going to save it for the unpopular opinions. But yeah, I think trying to estimate how long something's going to take is like, I think we spend a lot of time trying to do it and the results aren't good enough to really justify the effort we put into it. You know, honestly, a better approach is let the scope be flexible. Pick the deadline, sure, have the release all ready, but the actual scope, let that be flexible. And then, you know, build teams that you trust that will, you know, you don't need to micromanage and check on, you know, build motivated teams, keep teams motivated, put in that effort to do that. And then trust that they're going to work as fast as they can. You know, a lot of the dangers of measuring velocity is if things change over time, if things slow down, these numbers start to drop. You know, you could easily interpret that as somehow a reflection on the team going slower or something, but you can't really say that. It's much more like it's too chaotic. It could just be things are different. They're working on different things, more unknown stuff. You know, maybe there are things going on that have slowed it down, but measuring you wouldn't necessarily see it through that route. I don't think. You'd hope that there's other ways you'd find that stuff out. So yeah, I feel like I think that approach basically gets you better results, and you can still commit to some high level. Like, can still make good commitments that you're pretty confident you're going to hit. Yeah, you know, as long as you don't describe every possible thing and lock yourself into it.
You mentioned scope in your answer, and so you say kind of have a good team, have a clear deadline, and define a scope. What is a scope, and when you say what do you
just mean the set of features, the set of things we're going to do. Like, we're going to build this, we're going to add comments to our tool. So it's going to have comments and reactions and people's profile pictures in there. Okay, so that's now, if as we get underway and we realize we're running out of time, maybe we'll drop the profile pictures. Maybe we'll just focus on getting the core functionality. You know, like, we'll prioritize the most useful stuff first, so that at least gets done. And then now we've released less than what we wanted to, but what we've released still works. And then in the next time we do the profile pics. It's really that. But see, so if though we're going to release this and it's going to have your profile pictures on it, and suddenly people are like sold on that idea, you know, that's where you have then a difference in the expectations of what people are going to get. And that's a silly case with the profile pictures, but there are real examples where things will fall out of scope naturally along the way. And, you know, communicating that becomes important for sure, you know.
So in the scope, you define also importance, like priority?
Yeah, because I think one of the nice things about having those velocity points to spend is it forces you to think, right, what do we want to spend it on? You know, and what could we wait what could we have later? And it may be that there's like 3 big things you want, but you can't fit them all in. So you buy 2 big things, and then you've got change left over for a few smaller items. But it forces you to think, okay, if we had to like stop after this next sprint or this next time period, like if we have to stop, we want to have something that's just more valuable than what we have now. And if you're thinking of it like that, then you can get there with that, you know.
That reminds me a lot of Jared, what you said about the bucket way, kind of big, important, smaller, faster.
Yeah.
Jared, do you have?
Go ahead.
Jared, do you have like an idea of how many of those you'll get done in a week? Like if you planned it out, could you do like 3 big ones, 2 small ones, and 5 small ones?
I certainly could. Now, in the past, I was doing contract software, and I would have multiple projects ongoing. And so it'd be rare that I would dedicate, 40 straight hours to a single client and give them a week. I would split my week up across a few different projects. And so I didn't do that very often, but I certainly could. I can extrapolate just based on what my general idea is on the buckets of like a 1 to 2 hour thing, a 4 hour to 8 hour thing, and like a multi-day thing. To say, here's what we can generally do in a week.
Yeah. So that's kind of like you're using your experience of what you've done in the past. And then.
Yeah, that's like hard-earned experience too, because I had a bunch of terrible estimates for years. And it's not that my estimations got better, it's that I became more aware of how bad they were.
Right. So did you pad them out?
So I could.
Was it bias or noise?
Both. Probably both. But it's a way of speaking with people about the difficulty, not just in the building of the software, but in actually the managing of the project. Because the one thing that we know right now is that we don't know what we're going to know tomorrow. And so to set up something that's stringent or rigid is kind of a fool's errand. So I would definitely negotiate around scope, Matt, like you do. Like what's more, but I don't set the priorities. In the case of a client developer relationship, of course, I'm there as a advisor and an advocate and as a teammate, but ultimately the customer sets the priorities. So I'm here to set the difficulties and talk about what's more important and give advice like, are you sure that's the most important thing because X, Y, or Z? But ultimately they say, this is what's most important to me. And whatever falls below that threshold in the time period or in the budget they have, those things fall out. And as long as you can get the negotiation around that and both sides understand that relationship, it's not too bad. It's when the budget and the scope are fixed and the time everything is fixed. And now you're stuck to what your word was. Well, you said it was a medium thing. Well, it turns out I was wrong and it's actually a hard thing. But we didn't find that out until hours into it. And here's why. That's where it gets to be, it can be stressful for both sides because it's their money, it's their time.
Yeah, this is why you need that trust. Honestly, like if you don't trust the people you're working with, then you just probably shouldn't work with them. Basically, like it's the amount of extra work and the constraints you'd have to put in place to make it work.
Right.
And you end up micromanaging and, building software is really hard. It's way more complicated than we even realize. That's why we're always surprised by the nonsense these computers are doing in response to what is perfectly reasonable requests from us poor programmers. Chris.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say, Chris James messaged into the show, friend of the show, Chris James. And Chris James says we should check out Dora research, which shows that you don't actually have to trade speed and quality. They're correlated. And that actually building high quality software is the route to getting a good feedback, speed of feedback loop, and using great engineering really to achieve those two things. And it's kind of true, right? That's what.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think the scope, do less but do it really well. I think that as a rule has definitely served me well in my career. Like not adding all the features everybody wants. If you have like space and a bit of spare time in the team built in to just let things happen creatively, the little delightful things that people will build into the software makes it such a joy to use compared to just like boring software. It really makes a difference to people, and you know, your software will be more effective because of that, as well as being more liked, more popular, and hopefully, yeah, they're going to tweet about it and say, "Oh, look at this feature; it's good, isn't it?"
Is that how you read every tweet in your head?
Yeah. It's the only way to stop me from getting angry.
So that kind of goes back to my wrong direction thing from before. And I think you can be in the wrong direction on two fronts. On the product front, which I think what you're speaking to there, like what features go in, how do we build them? But then also technically, like if you're just trying to move fast, you are going to accumulate technical debt because speed is the desire. And so everything else be damned. And so I'm not sure if this is the best way of building this, but I don't have time to think about it. We got to get it out there. And so instead of actually analyzing and deciding and maybe spiking out a few different options on an architecture, you're like, nah, we're just going to do it this way. We got to move on. And that's where you can really shoot yourself with regards to the technical architecture. Whether or not the feature you're building is the right one is kind of orthogonal to that.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Like, you should learn where to spend the time. There's times to go slowly, and that's what experience brings. Is like, you know, these are ideas that need to percolate a while. We need to let them settle down and keep thinking about them in the context of what else we're doing before we just jump into it. And you do learn to then future-proof designs. Like one example I always use is a Boolean field. If you've got like a is active field and it's a Boolean true or false, consider what you might achieve and in the future potentially by replacing that with a status field that's a string that has active or inactive in there. So yes, it's less efficient, right? Because now it's a string and not a number, but you know, suddenly you have more options there in the future. And so I tend to kind of be quite future proof in my designs because I like to give my future self options because I know I don't have the answers now. I may know more later, and then I don't want to have painted myself into a corner.
Right. The other side of that, the non-moderation side of that, though, is over architecture, right? Because now you're like generifying everything and being ready for any circumstance. Yeah. And that can actually go against you in the long run as well. So finding that balance, I think your example is a great one where it's a small decision that can be future-proof, but it's not like going to cost you a bunch of extra time right now. But we have that desire of like, I'm going to engineer this so it handles any use case. And you're done.
Exactly.
You lost the game right there.
If it does everything, it doesn't do anything, basically, right? It's not doing anything in a way. Yeah, that's right. Of course, you go too far with it. Yeah, I know. And I think there is kind of experience there, but there probably are like techniques that people have come up with that allows you to sort of think about things. I know of a few that I've heard of in the past, but honestly, for me, it's always been instinctive. So how about you, Jared and Natalie? Like, do you find that there's a science here, or is this more like feels instinctive and gut feel?
So I will refer to somebody else whose name is escaping me, but he has
Strange
a rule.
Name.
Yeah, I mean,
I
whose
wonder where
parents
that's from.
named them
Escaping
me.
Yeah. Cool name, actually, now I've thought about it.
Check him out, escapingme.com. I hope that's not some sort of weird website. Don't check it out. Jared didn't tell you. There was a rule I heard, a way of making decisions, because that's really what this is. Like, do I invest more time here to get it right, or do I do the quick and dirty thing to move on, or whatever? And he says their team categorizes decisions into two buckets: easy to reverse and hard to reverse. And if it's easily reversible, well, then you just pick a choice and move on. But if it's actually a thing where it's like, if we have to back out of this, it's going to be a lot of pain. Now let's slow
Right.
down and spend the extra time. I think that's a useful
Mm.
scientific way of thinking about it versus just mere intuition. Natalie, did you have any thoughts?
I think I know what you described as the one-way door or two-way door, the way Jeff Bezos introduced it.
Okay.
That's
Yeah,
how
that's who it
they
was. It was
take
my friend Jeff
decisions
Bezos.
He's also in the US, right? You know each other.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree that this is a good way of deciding whether to slow down and evaluate, or go fast, because this is reversible. This is making a lot of sense. And in the book, the noise book, they talk about taking a decision based on a hunch. So this is connecting to me, Matt, to something that you said, that you kind of do this intuitively. And they are saying that taking intuitive decisions is not always a good way to go about things. And another interesting example that they bring is sort of like a mini research that they did at some insurance agency, where they took the management and they said, give us some 10 scenarios and we'll give your different evaluators to evaluate that, and then let's see what would be the price for the premium that they might charge, and also 10 cases, and what would be the claim that they would pay. And they asked them, those managers, what do you think will be the variance? Like how much different would it be from each other? And so if you're asked this, maybe in the context of Agile, what do you think that your developers, how different would be their evaluations of a task?
Yeah, well,
10%,
sometimes
100%.
sometimes they are off. Yeah, but you sort of coalesce eventually as you learn from each other.
Mm-hmm.
But what did they find?
So this was expected to be something like 10% variance, and it ended up being 55%. And this translates to a lot of money that is being lost, specifically in the world of insurance agents. And you made a very good point, Matt, saying that people learn from each other and then compare and then kind of find the center, because this is exactly what was recommended there in the book as how to avoid such a big difference, is actually not just give guidelines and ask all the employees to follow that when they need to do their evaluation and take their decision, but also to share knowledge and also to come open-minded with the fact that even if your evaluation is like double or half than the other person, it does not mean that either of you is wrong.
Right.
It means that it's something in the process.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that sounds great, because you often see like a junior person, their numbers will be higher often or sometimes lower, but they'll often be slightly away from where the sort of mean meet, because they don't have the same context, they don't have the same information. But it's most interesting when someone's way off as an outlier, and it's the conversation you have about that work that's the really valuable bit in any estimation sessions for me. So you sit around all together and say, okay, we're going to add this functionality. I suppose we'll use that integration. We'll do that thing. We've got this mechanism before. We've done something like it. We'll use that. Then there's some UI work. Someone might say, oh, but what about this? Don't forget, it's got to work in the Slack integration as well. And you're like, oh, yeah, okay. So you sort of then get everything out that's just fresh of mind, and then you have an idea of that work. And honestly, just that little process of everyone chipping in was so valuable, and often you'd learn so much.
You definitely see a wider image.
So my unpopular opinion would be keep estimation.
Hold on, we gotta play the music.
Hold on, should we do it?
Music. Yeah,
I've got one.
You might have your.
Is it
I might
live
have
or
to sing
preview?
again. It is live because the first one worked.
It sometimes stops working.
So if I switch to preview, it does play.
Yeah.
Matt,
Okay,
maybe
switch
you
back to
can
live.
care to sing live.
Matt, sing it for us.
No.
All right, we'll insert it in post production.
Yes,
Just
please.
imagine Matt singing to us.
Dun 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 boom. Dun dun dun.
Opinion.
There you go. Mix
I
I
that.
actually
really
in.
think you
she
should
probably
quite
leave.
leave right now.
I actually think
You believe what?
You what?
Is this what Matt's saying? Have I been hearing wrong all this time?
No, he says two things. He says, "You believe what?" I
No,
actually
no.
think you should probably leave.
Yeah.
I don't say you believe what. I just say you what.
Oh, you said you what?
Yeah, yeah. But you know, in the
Close enough.
original, I go, you what? Right, like that. And then
That's
when
good.
Breakmaster Cylinder remixed it,
Yeah.
they changed it. So it actually goes, you what, really fast. So they've changed the you what if you listen to the two versions.
Wow.
There you go.
I should go back to the original. Did you prefer that?
No, I
Sounds
don't
like you
did.
did.
I liked the.
Maybe
I
this
liked
can be an
both.
opinion.
Yeah, this is.
BMC ruined my song.
No, he didn't ruin it. They made it better. My unpopular opinion is we should keep estimation sessions, but throw away the estimations. The sessions themselves are great. They're so useful to talk through all the work, get all our ideas out, see where the interest lies of who's going to maybe do the work. But the estimations are useless, pretty much.
That sounds brilliant to me. I like the way you frame that, and I think it's a smart idea. So I
Yeah.
think this is not an unpopular opinion, but just a good idea.
Well, I sure hope it makes it to the Twitter feed.
We'll see.
Well, we'll see.
Have you-
So I'll be keeping an eye on it like a hawk.
Have you done an unpopular opinion before, or is this your first one ever? Because this
No, I
is
have
wildly
done one.
popular, by the way.
I've done one and I've regretted it ever since, and I knew I would. So I knew before I said it I was going to regret it. I then said it thinking I'm going to regret this, and then later now I regret saying it. Do you know what I mean? So
I do. That's utter. I call that
Yeah.
utter.
utter.
What about this one? Do you regret saying this one?
No, I think this is all right. This one.
That's gonna
Might not be unpopular, but still a good opinion.
See what the people say on Twitter. Let them decide. Really,
Yeah.
Yeah, they're brutal out there.
they are. They tell the truth. You know, when you ask them a question, they sometimes tell you the truth in a DM that you've not asked for, as well. Can happen. I've had that once or twice.
I love doing
Natalie.
Twitter polls. I also have an unpopular opinion. Books that are meant to teach people new concepts but are not technical ones should be shorter. I find that there's many interesting things to read out there. So I've been trying to read the book about growth mindset, and the idea of what is this growth mindset is being explained very well very early on, and then the rest of the books is just different examples. And I stopped following at some point because it's just explaining the same thing again and again and again in a different way, and I am in this limbo that I don't know if I'm going to lose any other information. Will they introduce anything new in the end of the book or not?
Yeah.
Should I keep reading it? Should I keep listening to it or not? Or is it just going to be more examples? So books should be either more clear structured, where is the new information, or just be shorter because it's an introductory book.
I like this. I don't want to advertise. I don't get anything for this. Let me just sign up so I can do a referral program. But there's a thing called Blinkist, which essentially is this. The idea is it takes a book and distills it down to 15 minutes, the key concepts, the most important thing. The idea being, like, if it really resonates with you, you'll then go and read the book, I guess. But it maybe satisfies what you've said, which is there's so many ideas out there. And of course, they've got to pad it into a full book in order to be able to sell one unit.
Do they?
Well, that's what they do.
You want to
Well,
pad
they
that, and
think
then
they
somebody
do,
goes and
yeah.
summarizes that for you. Just make it short. Make it to the point. Make it a book.
Yeah.
Then it's a blog post, right?
Would you
Like,
pay
they
for
can't sell you that blog post?
£40 for a blog post?
Exactly.
If you have pounds? No one else has pounds on here apart
I'd
from
happily
me.
lose £40 for a blog post.
I'm listening
it's
to
a new
books, and on
exercise
Audible, it's
based.
usually €10 per book. It's not 40.
10 year.
Oh, that's quite a lot. Audible too.
It's a almost flat rate. Yeah,
Oh, I see. So for all books.
practically, it's very hard to find a
they're
book
not
that
all
is
the
not
that's
same.
not
€10.
$10 per book then. That's not $10 for a book. That's $10 for the entire library of the earth,
No,
which is pretty
No.
good deal.
You
it's
still
per
have to
book.
pick the book. Yeah.
Oh, it's still per book. Okay, I'm back to
I mean,
it being
maybe
a bad
there's
deal.
different
Better than
programs, I
others,
don't know.
though.
Yeah, I don't know. I have yet to come across a book that is not €10. Sometimes they have sales that something is cheaper or for free, but most of the books you find there is like 1 unit of credit, and that costs you 10 euros.
I don't want to be a salesperson for that company, but surely there's already a subscription program where you can just
Blinkist.
unlock unlimited. I'm not saying that one again, but the audio was, I nearly said the
Audible.
brand name. Don't say the brand name.
Oh no.
Oh,
We've advertised them now for free. Jared's
said
going to be
Blinkist.
livid. Yeah, I also said I don't want to advertise them.
They pay
because
good money
Jared
to
tells me.
advertise on podcasts, just not ours. So
Exactly. So
go
we'll give
ahead,
it for
say
free.
their name. Yeah, well,
Yeah, but it devalues
already
it then,
ripped.
doesn't it?
into Jeff Bezos earlier.
it's a
we
Berlin-based
didn't.
company.
Audible
Oh.
is?
Blinkist.
Oh, Blinkist. Now we're saying they're both their brand names over and over again.
Have you heard of that company before then, Natalie? That app.
I know this great podcast.
Hmm.
It's called Go Time.
Good podcast. It was the home where the great invention of Jared's, where it was, what was it? You'd lose weight by reading a blog post, or in order to unlock the blog post, you have to hit certain exercise goals.
Yeah,
Something
I
like
think
that.
that would be motivating.
Yeah.
You know,
Fit
it's like a
blog or
paywall,
something.
but it's more of like a fit wall.
It's a pain wall. Fit wall. That's good. Fit wall
wall,
is
I
the
should
name
like
of it. No, fit
Yeah.
wall. Fit wall.
Okay.
That's the name.
I like it.
Get the .com quick.
We're gonna solve
Remember
the
where you heard this
obesity
first.
epidemic. Yes.
Changelog doesn't own this idea, does it? Just because we've said it on this. How does that work legally?
Fit wall, yes. All your IP
Mhm.
are belong to us.
Well, I'm going to see if I can get the domain name.
Jared, is
I
this your
can't.
unpopular opinion?
No, I have one. Though.
You have one. Please share.
Okay, so yes, I will. So thank you. Last time I was on the show, we had a little debate around the terms we software people use to describe ourselves. Coder, programmer,
Yeah.
developer, engineer.
Cool dude.
Cool dude.
Yeah.
And since that show went out, I've had lots of follow-ups from people kind of affirming what I said on the show, which is that everybody kind of has different definitions for what these are. And so there's no consistency. And so it's kind of meaningless to a certain degree. However, I did learn that in Europe, engineer is like a protected class or something. Like you have to have a degree of some kind, which is a much more formal definition of engineer. I'm not sure if that's software engineers or just engineers or both. But I learned that from somebody on Twitter. So that's cool. Lots of conversations, people telling me that they mean different things to them. We did a poll on Changelog's Twitter about which of those four do you prefer to be called?
Ooh, can we guess?
Yeah, go ahead and guess.
So what are the four options?
It was coder, programmer, developer, engineer.
Oh, right. I think engineer is like the most serious sounding. So if you're really serious about building, if you see yourself as, because proper software engineering is really hard. Like it's basically impossible, isn't it? If we're honest.
It's basically impossible.
It's just this side of impossible, which is why we
Right.
still do it. So I think that might be the choice if the changelog audience are kind of like quite serious about their work.
Right.
What do you think, Natalie?
I would say developer.
Okay. Good guesses, because those two tied for first place. 42% each. And this was a pretty good sample size. We had a few hundred people reply, so it wasn't like a GoTime FM poll where we get 23 votes. Come on, people, follow GoTime FM and vote on our Unpop polls. We need you. We need your help. The Go community depends on your votes. Okay.
Yeah, and how am I going to get a hair transplant if we don't get more listeners on GoTime? So come on, everyone, listen in. Listen harder. Go and listen to the ads twice.
Yeah.
Does that work?
And answer the poll.
And answer the poll. Yeah. Okay. So 13% of respondents were happy to be called a programmer. 3% of respondents want to be called coder.
Really?
So
coder. No one wants it.
In Leslie Lamport's video that we're referring to, he defines coding and programming as two different things.
Right.
And this was something that people said to me was that coding is like typing, and developing or programming is much more than just typing. So my unpopular opinion, this is a huge setup. We're going to cut this part out of the video. My unpopular opinion is that it's inappropriate to compare coding to typing. So if you're a writer and you do all the things that writers do, think of the story, the characters, your ideas, design the story, etc. And then you go to write. Those are two processes. That's fair with me. If you're a developer and you go doing all the things that developers going to do, plan, make decisions, test things, estimate some points wrongly, whatever you're going to do, and then you go to write the software, I think it's inappropriate to say that the coding part of a developer's job is akin to the typing part of a writer's job, because typing and coding are different. It's the writing part. So a writer writes. Okay, typing is just like a thing that goes mechanically between you and a machine, but a coder codes, a developer codes. And so there's more, coding's much more than just typing. I think it belittles it to compare it to typing.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. When I first read that, I thought they were saying that coding is really like is just getting the act of getting it into the editor, and the programming is happening outside of that and is the bigger thing. But you're right, definitely between like typing and coding. I mean, you have to type in order to get coding to happen as well. So I think that is interesting that they have these. But I'm surprised Coder just got 3%, because
nobody wants to be
honestly,
a coder.
I thought that sounded the coolest, but I might be out of. Have I reached the age now where I don't know what's cool?
It might be an age thing, because I think programmer is like an older term that I think probably people who've been around longer. I mean, it used to be programmers write programs, but then programs became apps, and programmers kind of became developers. I don't know why or when, but it seemed like that kind of happened, and programmers fallen a little bit out of what's it called? Trend.
Yeah,
out of
I think
vogue. But coder is like, nobody wants to be that.
I think when I hear code, I'm thinking of Code Monkey. I heard this term so many times in the negative context of somebody saying, I want to do more than being a code monkey. And I think that's
that's a good point. Maybe that's why people associate it with that concept of like, just take a ticket and do the coding, you code monkey. And like, we don't want to be put in that box. That might be true. That might be what it is.
Yeah, that could be it. I understand that. But in a way, I quite like being modest. But then I'm in a position where I can be. But obviously not everyone can just be immediately modest, but like you have to sell yourself, that's what I mean, like when you get into your career and stuff. But I like it when like you see people that have invented core concepts that we all use in their bio just as programmer. It's very understated, and I think that is quite cool. So it may come back, it may be retro.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I hope so. But I quite like developer because it sounds like it's developing. It's never finished. An engineer, you almost like at some point it'll be engineered and then it's done and it's delivered. Whereas there's something nice about the fact you're telling people like, this isn't going to be finished. So get that out of your head now. This thing is going to drag on.
Well, when I think of engineering, I think of like building a bridge, which is very much rooted in years and years of physics and math and like known equations, and we put ropes. And we can engineer a bridge and then it's done, and we know exactly what it's capable of and what it will buckle under. And I don't feel like software is ever like that. Like, we're learning constantly. It's like, it's more like that whole flying a plane or changing it while it's flying or something. I don't know.
No, it's true. It's because like the speed at which we can iterate and that feedback loop, actually, which is one of the points we were talking, it's come up a few times throughout this, like that having a feedback loop and having it a short feedback loop, like that is what enables you to move quickly, because you can try things, walk back if you got it wrong. You haven't committed loads of resources to it because it's just a small thing anyway, so you don't feel bad. You can then correct course, and I think that working at that kind of resolution is the way to do it. And that's why it's so hard to estimate stuff when none of us are doing anything we've really done before. we're probably doing something no one's ever done before in lots of ways. And so, like, we should give ourselves a break and tell our managers to shut up.
Perfect way to finish this episode about velocity. Gentlemen, thank you for joining. That was fun. I don't know if you can hear on the outside, there's the firework of Berlin celebrating the sunset of the longest day of the year. But it's done.
Oh,
The day's done.
congrats, Berlin.
It happened.
Oh,
It's been a pleasure spending it with you.
oh, what a long day, but
We talked to you all day.
felt like it. I
Throughout
tell you
the
what,
sunset.
it's been a pleasure. There's not two people I wouldn't rather spend an entire long day with. So thank you very much.
The feeling's mutual.
Took ages to say that, but fine.
Dramatically pressing the button and nothing happens. I've been even
Yes.
toggling secretly between preview and live, so I'm gonna have
I
to
don't
trust
know.
me
We
on this
broke
one.
the soundboard at some point. All good.
That's my secret skill, doing things that make Riverside break. More than once. Yeah.
Okay, well, that was a fun show. I
That was
should
an outro
apologize
sound.
to the chat room because man, there's lots of chats going on, and I missed like
Oh.
the first half hour of chat because I had a different tab open. So, thanks for hanging
Yeah.
out in the chat, guys. We had Henry, Jason, we've got Dylan in there, Chris, Ian, Alan. Lots of people in the
Oh.
chat, so that was fun.
Yeah.
Garrep.
That is
Garrep.
interesting.
Lots of
Normally-
people who end in an N, whose first name ends in N. Seems to be popular in this chat tonight. And a Y.
And okay. Oh, that's first name. Yeah, Henry.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah,
going
Henry,
last
yeah.
name. Surname.
No.
Call it over
Cool,
there.
cool. I will say thank you to everybody who joined through the chat as well. And we will stop this recording.
Goodbye, everybody. See you next
Bye.
week. Uh-oh.
Oh, we've got to do another episode now. Hello and welcome to